Today we're finally taking a closer look at the Power Mac. Previously we took a look at this awesome Apple Cinema display. We cleaned it up and as you can see it is looking fantastic. I still can't believe how well it actually cleaned up, and it's a great addition to have in the setup here. It not only matches the Power Mac itself and any other Power Mac from this era, but as an ADC display, in order to get everything up and running, all I have to do is plug in that one cable into the Power Mac and we're good to go. So cable mess is non-existent, and the only cable that we actually have to deal with also matches the setup. If you want to see more about this monitor and how we actually cleaned it up in the first place, I will leave a link to the video in the description. Enough about the display though, let's go ahead and move on to the Power Mac. The cable situation on the Power Mac is definitely lacking to say the least. Believe it or not, it was actually looking way worse than it currently is right now, but we do still have a lot left to do. Before we had the advantage of ADC, I was stuck with this. Now I wasn't necessarily stuck with only VGA and a DVI to VGA adapter, but the testing monitor that I grabbed, which was initially just for testing, only had VGA available, so I was stuck with this. Yeah, I could have swapped out the monitor, or I could have gotten something else to work with the setup, but then I got this, which is of course ADC, so this is completely out of the picture now. The other thing that has been swapped out is the power supply cable. Previously we were using this one, and while it's a perfectly fine cable, it just wasn't long enough for the new setup. The old one actually had to be on top of the desk and go down to the power supply, and even then it barely made it to the Power Mac. This new one though is double the length of the old one, and they both have the same technical specifications, except for the fact that this one is also rated for higher temperatures. Now, I never had any problems with overheating or anything like that, but this one is both an upgrade in terms of the length and the actual capabilities of the cable. Even though it looks like it is a thinner cable, surprisingly, it is an upgrade. So even though I don't have an official Apple cable, this is the next best thing. Now later on, we can try to take a look at how to fix this nonsense here, but right now let's just open up the Power Mac and see what we're dealing with. With the door out of the way, we have a Power Mac. Wow, I never would have guessed that. Very cool. When I cleaned up the outside of the Power Mac, I also cleaned up the door. Now this is just a piece of aluminum, but it's a nice looking piece of aluminum. And fortunately, it doesn't have too much in terms of scratches or scrapes or really any significant damage. Obviously, if you're trying to look for all the imperfections, you will find some, but it's only really noticeable in certain lighting and certain angles. Like you can kind of see one here, but usually under normal viewing conditions, it looks great. The inside part of the door is also brand new, plastic included. It's really cool to see that this is still in fantastic shape, and not only that, you get these incredibly detailed ancient hieroglyphics on how to actually upgrade your RAM. It's really cool to see that this is still in fantastic shape, and I will be keeping the plastic on the door because how often do you see something like that? But at the same time, it's a nice thing to have in between the door itself and the acrylic. Even if the effect is minimal, it will still help in keeping the acrylic as clean as possible in terms of scratches. The door itself is also not 100% perfect. There are two holes here where there should be alignment pins. These match up with holes on the Power Mac itself, and even though these cannot do their job because they're missing, it really doesn't affect the door because the three latches on the locking mechanism really do a great job at holding the door on. Beyond the door is no man's land, or more accurately, the stuff I never got around to cleaning. I love the design of the G5, but the only thing that's sticking out right now is the dust, which we do not want to have because this is such a cool system, but the dust really brings it down. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the dust has actually gotten out of the system from the insane cooling solution. We really do need to take care of this because I'm tired of looking at it as it is right now, and considering how well the cinema display cleaned up, this thing is probably going to end up looking like a brand new G5. Honestly, it probably looks better on camera, but you'll see what I mean in just a moment. The acrylic piece, which also has a squeaky mechanism, definitely needs to be cleaned up because as you can see, there is a lot of surface dust on that, and it's not going anywhere. For comparison, this is what acrylic is supposed to look like. But if you take a look at this, Well, it's the opposite of that cinema display. This is supposed to be crystal clear, but as you can see, it's pretty much the opposite. We'll take a look at all of the technical specs of the G5 later on, but first, let's make it a bit more presentable. As it is, without indirect lighting, it doesn't look bad, but it is pretty bad. Pretty much everything is covered in dust. Even though the optical drive looks fine on the side, the top and the bottom are both covered with dust. Same goes for the IDE cable. That thing is also coated with a ton of dust. The plastic itself is also no exception. Even though on the side it looks fine, the top has turned into a different color because of all that dust. The area for the PCI cards is also extremely filthy. There's not only dust on the graphics card itself, but also underneath it. The G5 cover is actually in pretty good shape, but it could still do with a clean. The main fan assembly though is a whole other thing. This part was actually covered completely with dust, but because I actually had to remove it in order to install some RAM, you can see that that area is where my hand actually touched the plastic, and it has since wiped off that dust. It wasn't noticeable until it became noticeable. And that same type of dust is also on the fan blades themselves. So, yeah, even though it doesn't look terrible, it's pretty bad. And of course, who can forget about this? The logic board itself is actually in pretty good shape, and specifically the RAM is also really clean, but that is because I installed that RAM, so it was clean to begin with. The top part here is also in pretty good shape, but the top of the PCI slots do actually need a wipe down. Now, even though the G5 has a lot of user serviceable components, the stuff that's integrated into the housing as a whole is the complete opposite. The G5 is a fantastic system to work on, but unlike the G4 systems and before, some of these components are, at the very least, frustrating to remove, if not impossible, and potentially even destructive if you don't know what you're doing. Even though there's a lot of room inside this enclosure, there's actually not that much space to work on, especially when you consider things such as the hard drive caddy or some of the fans on the inside part of the system that are really difficult to get access to. So to keep things simple, I will take out everything that is easy to remove, but in terms of the housing itself, I will try to just clean everything as much as I possibly can. I first started off by removing the CPU fan assembly. It's so easy to work on that it has a built-in handle. It's a shame we don't see stuff like this anymore, but it really does make me appreciate these older PowerPC Macs. After that, I moved on to the speaker and fan assembly. Now that one is not as plug and play because it does actually have a cable you have to remove, but all things considered, it's still easy to work on. And then after that, I removed the optical drive, which I had to be really careful with because as you can see, it's really dusty, but that's nothing we can't fix. Well, this was unexpected. The IDE cable is actually adhered to the optical drive. I was trying to detach the cable from the drive and take them out separately, but I didn't even think to detach the cable from the IDE connector itself on the logic board, and secondly, it did that for me. Even though I got most of the tape off, at the very least we can see that this is indeed a factory Apple drive. With those three components out of the way, I also removed the G5 emblem cover. The last thing that had to be removed was the graphics card itself. And considering the entire state of the system, I also decided to remove the PCI covers because I might as well. I'm already cleaning everything else up, so why not clean those also? And unfortunately, I am missing one of the PCI covers, but in the future, I would like to add some extra cards to the Mac, so that way we don't actually need to get another blank plate, and it would also bring some extra functionality. And I also removed the other fan assembly on the right side of the CPU heatsinks. Even though everything was coated with a healthy layer of dust, I'm actually pretty surprised that it wasn't worse, because this case is optimized for airflow because the G5s themselves run pretty toasty, but it seems like a lot of this dust was just from years of inactivity, so it honestly could have been worse. Here is everything we've taken out of the G5 so far, alongside the PCI brackets, of course. And I've noticed something interesting with the DVD drive. Now, first off, we do know that this is a factory component because it does have the Apple logo. But what's interesting about this specific drive is that it was made in July of 2005. Now, why is that so interesting? This is a June 2004 revision of the G5. This specific model of the G5 was sold until April of 2005. Now there are a couple of different ways to tell which Macintosh model you have. We're not going to talk about all of them right now, but the first and definitely the most helpful part is the sticker down here with all of the information as to how your Macintosh left the factory. Not only that, the serial number actually has important information. That's right. The serial number used to actually mean something back in the day. Nowadays, it's just a string of random numbers and letters, but with the serial number, you can figure out which generation of Power Mac you have. Using a website like everymac.com, I was able to double check with the serial number that this is indeed a June 2004 revision. And like I said earlier, this model was discontinued in April of 2005. Why is this DVD drive inside this Mac? This drive was made 3 months after this Mac model was discontinued. It is still an Apple component, but it just doesn't make that much sense that it would be the original drive for this Mac, because around this time I highly doubt that they had extra Macs just laying around from this generation, and they for some reason decided to put a newer optical drive. It just doesn't make that much sense to me. There are a couple of things that I think make more sense than this theory. And the first one being is that maybe whoever had this before had a parts Macintosh which was newer, or, it was a newer Mac but they weren't using the optical drive for some reason. Whatever the case is, they took that official drive out of this Mac and put it into this. But another possible thing that may have happened is that maybe this was sent into repair. Considering it's only a 3-month gap in between discontinuation and production, it's very likely that this was possibly sent in for Apple Care repair or something along the lines of that. I know that nowadays Apple Care is completely different, and most of the time if it's a pretty severe problem, they'll just give you a brand new system. I'm not really sure how they did stuff like this back in the day though, but if it was just a faulty optical drive, then it does make sense that it was swapped out under warranty. It's also possible that this could have been a refurbished model, but I'm pretty sure that it would have a refurbished sticker or something along the lines of that. And I really don't think that that's the case here. I'm leaning more towards that this was either swapped out by whoever had the Mac, or this was swapped out by Apple because of Apple Care. But whatever the case is, I'm still happy that it's just a factory Apple drive at all, because it definitely adds to the look, especially with the sticker on the side here. It was definitely something I did not expect to see, but still interesting to talk about. With that out of the way though, let's go ahead and start cleaning all these components up. The first chunk of cleaning is now officially complete, and honestly the results speak for themselves. I knew that it would take some time to get everything cleaned up because I wanted to all be factory fresh, but even with that in mind, it still took quite a while to get everything as it is right now. Obviously, all the fans here would have taken quite a bit of time to do regardless. It was more time consuming in the fact that it wasn't like the dusty type of dust, if that's even a good way to describe it. Everything was more like baked onto the plastic. Not that it really affected the plastic at all, because as you can see, it's in fantastic condition. With everything here, I was actually pretty surprised about the G5 cover and the acrylic. Now, we already know about the acrylic. Even though it looked like it was in fantastic shape, there was actually a lot of hidden grime on the back and even the front. So even when I gave this a couple of passes with isopropyl alcohol, it was still dirty. I spent quite a bit of time cleaning this up, and as you can see, it was definitely worth it, not to mention it's actually clean now. Now, the G5 logo has some minor imperfections, but I mean, that's minimal at best. So all things considered, I'm really happy with how this turned out. The acrylic piece is not in perfect condition, but at the same time, I really don't care because it's usually just inside the Mac, and as you can see, it still looks to be in pretty good shape. Obviously, there was a lot of surface dust, but just like the G5 cover, there was also a lot of grime just built up on it, and even when it looked like it was clean, I gave it another pass, and it was still dirty. And even stuff like the graphics card here cleaned up very nicely. I obviously was more careful with this because, well, it's a GPU, but as you can see, it does look basically brand new. The PCB is actually blue, not gray, and the heatsink has no dust. So overall, I'm really happy with how everything turned out, and of course, the DVD drive itself does actually look brand new as well. The metal cover bracket thing on the front here is not perfect, but I don't really care because it's only on the top side that has some minor imperfections, while everything else looks like it's just fine. Honestly, the cleanest part of everything here was probably this cover, because whenever the fan is here and the bezel is obviously in place, there's really not that much of an opportunity for dust to get to this part. It was still dusty, but nowhere near as crazy as the fans or even the G5 cover. The PCI covers were actually pretty dirty as well. Not as bad as the G5 cover, but they weren't as clean as this bezel. But now we have to go back to the Power Mac and start cleaning it up. Now, initially, I wasn't planning on taking the Power Mac apart any further. However, after seeing the condition of the fans, I would like to try and get the last two remaining fans out of the system. Now, I'll do this off camera because, as you can see, there really isn't that much space available, and, well, it's not really going to be that fun to watch. I will show you guys how the fans look, though, and hopefully we can get them out. It does seem relatively straightforward, all things considered, especially with everything else out of the way. And alongside that, I would like to try and take the PCI card holder here out as well. It looks like there's only 2 screws holding that in, and it would be nice to give that a good clean as well. Now, as for remaining components like the hard drive caddy here, although it would be nice to get this out so I can completely clean the top shelf, I'm not exactly sure if I'll be able to do that without even further disassembling the Power Mac, and I don't necessarily want to do that. I'm not too worried about it if I can't, because it's not an active cooler like the fans, and I'll still be able to give this a good clean. As for the heat sinks, even though I could try to take these out, I only have a flexible screwdriver extension in the iFixit toolkit. That'll definitely come in handy for the fans, but I'm just not sure if it's strong enough for something as heavy as this. These are really large heat sinks. I don't want to damage anything, and I already know that there's no issues in terms of overheating because I've been using the Power Mac in the current state as it is, and it's been fine. So unless I get a proper, like a Mac cracker type of thing to take these heat sinks out, I'm not going to deal with these. I'll just try to clean them up as much as possible while it's still in the system. And the same goes for the rest of the logic board, this shelf here, which I'm pretty sure is attached on the other side of the system. So I will try to take the fans out, but like I said, everything else is still going to stay the same, but we will still try to make it as clean as possible. This certainly has been an interesting development. We did get the fans out of the system as well as the PCI card bracket holder thing because they were actually relatively easy to take out. But the plastic thing is still inside the Mac because even though I tried to take it out, it feels like I'm going to break it. So I don't want to risk it. And for the hard drive bay, I didn't even bother because, well, it's even more difficult to take out compared to this. And this is supposed to be the easier of the two. Now, in theory, I should be able to move this counterclockwise and remove it from the Mac that way. But no, it's not working. At least not easily. And like I said, I don't want to break anything. I'm sure it would be easier to take apart if I was completely disassembling the entire Mac, but this is as far as I want to go. Now, it was cool to see how the Mac itself is constructed, but the fans themselves are actually really clean. Yes, they are still a little bit dusty, and I will take the time to completely clean them out because they're right here. I just don't know if it was worth the time and the effort to try and get them out. Of course, I was trying to be careful and not break anything, and if I was to do this again, I know what to do. But at the same time, these are the cleanest fans out of the entire system. At the very least, these fans will be clean as well. I also decided to remove the rear cover for the ventilation because it was actually really easy to do so. It only has like 9 screws holding it together to the aluminum, and it'll be nice to completely clean this out as well. This also gives us a more detailed look at the G5 processors, and as you can see, they have a massive cooling solution. The last 2 fans have been cleaned up and they're ready to go back into the Power Mac. Honestly, these fans have not changed whatsoever. Even though I did completely clean them up, well, it looks like they were fine to begin with. Now, I was expecting the blower fan to actually have a lot of hidden dust inside of it because it obviously has this enclosure, but surprisingly, it was actually the cleanest out of every single fan in the entire Power Mac. This one had a very, very small amount of surface dust, but compared to the rest of the fans, it was practically brand new. Now, of course, there was no way of actually guaranteeing how clean these fans were because, especially with the blower fan, it's positioned like this inside the Power Mac, and there's really no way of knowing how dusty it actually was. So it was pretty much a gamble as to if they were clean or not, and considering I'm disassembling it all with everything over there, I might as well do this as well. It would have been nice to leave these inside the Power Mac because it's definitely inconvenient, to say the least, to get these reinstalled, but at least we now know for certain that they are clean, we won't have any issues with dust, and it definitely made it a lot easier to clean the rest of the system as well with these out of the way. We also can't forget about the rear cover for the ventilation. Now, initially I did not remove this because I didn't really think too much of it, but as I started to actually take a closer look at it, I didn't realize how bad it actually was. It was even more drastic as I started to actually clean it and see what it's supposed to look like instead of how it actually was. Even though it took quite a long time to do, you can see that it was definitely worth it, and I didn't even know that the inside is actually supposed to be pretty reflective. So it's really cool to see that this is in brand new shape. And something else that I didn't know until I actually took this out is that there is foam on the inside and it is still in good condition. So I don't have to replace this, I don't have to deal with any of that because it's pretty much a brand new component again. It probably hasn't been this clean since it was made in the factory, and I'm just glad that we can actually have a pretty new looking G5 once again. In the grand scheme of things though, this is nothing when you compare it to this. That's right, the Power Mac is now 100% dust free in terms of how it currently is right now. I spent a lot of time trying to clean it up as much as possible, and even though it's not 100% cosmetically perfect, it sure is a whole lot better to work with. To give you guys a more detailed overview at the condition of everything, it looks fantastic. It is a lot cleaner and a lot nicer to work with, and even though the internal structure does have some minor scuffs and scrapes, I mean, just cleaning it up from the dust made it look 1,000 times better. Now, this plastic structure, I initially thought it was actually separated into two parts. I also tried to remove it while the blower motor was still in the back there. So yeah, not recommended to do that. Fortunately, nothing actually broke. The hard drive bay looks fantastic. The plastic basically looks brand new, and I have no complaints. It's awesome, and it'll definitely be nice for when we actually install a hard drive. The rest of the internal structure here, like the built-in shelf, cleaned up really nicely. Same goes for the PCI card slots. But unfortunately, the shelf itself does have some cosmetic damage, and there's really nothing I can do about that because it's just how the shelf is. I tried to clean it up as best as possible, and even though there was a lot of dust built up on it, this is something that I cannot easily remove. The only real fix I see is to swap out the shelf entirely, which really isn't essential because the shelf itself is still in good condition, or I could try to sand it down, but then it would alter the appearance of the case as a whole in a different way. So it's not really something I'm going to focus on because most of the time you're actually using the Power Mac anyways, so even though it's a minor thing, at the very least, it is cleaned up. The logic board itself is in fantastic condition, and even the dusty RAM slots as well as the connectors at the bottom cleaned up really nicely as well. Interestingly enough, the metal on the bottom here has similar cosmetic damage as to that of the shelf. A good portion of the Power Mac is obviously made from aluminum, so obviously this, the front here, and of course the door itself, but the bottom here, the middle shelf, and the top shelf, as well as I believe the inner structure here, is all made of steel. So I guess steel would be more susceptible to some kind of cosmetic damage. That is, if water or something else may have gotten inside. And well, you know, it just does this. There's really nothing I can do about it. and like I said, no amount of cleaning is really going to fix it up. But thankfully it's on the inside of the Power Mac, and I don't necessarily think it would be water damage because I'm pretty sure some of it would probably have gotten on the logic board itself, but I only really find it here, and this necessarily isn't like water damage looking, so I'm not exactly sure what could have caused this, but I still wanted to mention it that even though it does look like it's a completely aluminum enclosure, the inside does still use some steel. Ever since I got the Power Mac, I've been wanting to clean it up like I just did right now, and well, it's finally done. It's clean. I don't have 20-year-old dust inside, and well, that same dust isn't going to evacuate the Power Mac into the space here. So this system is finally clean, at least as clean as I can possibly make it, and you know, I'm not counting the cosmetic damage because, well, yeah, but this system is finally good to go in terms of there's no dust, it's actually clean, I don't have to wash my hands every time I open the system, and it'll also be fun to actually upgrade this system, but I need to get the upgrades first. Later on, we will also be installing the hard drive, which will be very exciting and also life-changing. Yeah, very life-changing to install a hard drive, but that's where we're at right now. That'll be very fun to do. And maybe during reassembly we can install the GPU and the RAM together, but for the most part we already saw disassembly, and some things are going to be a bit more inconvenient to install compared to everything else. So we will skip forward to a mostly assembled Power Mac, and even though for you it's just a short video, for me this has been a relatively long ongoing project, so I'm just happy for this to be nearing the finish point because, well, it's been sitting like that for a while now. The Power Mac is finally starting to resemble a Power Mac once again, and I have a small update regarding the upper two fans here on the top shelf. I thought that it would be near impossible to get these fans back into the system, but what I didn't realize is that Apple being Apple, they actually made it relatively easy to do. It's obviously not easy to work in this space because, well, that's the size of the optical drive and the shelf is just a little bit taller than that. So even though it took a little while to get these fans into place, what I didn't realize about the rubber mounting solution is that they actually have holes at the end of every single one of them, and I was able to use that to my advantage and get some string around it to basically just pull it through and put the fan into its proper place. It was really easy to do, but the first string that I chose snapped immediately, but after I swapped it out for something better, it worked pretty much instantly. If I have to remove these in the future, then I know how to actually deal with them, but surprisingly, it wasn't that bad. With that out of the way, we obviously have the optical drive reinstalled, the speaker and the fan assembly, the PCI card holder alongside the awesome G5 emblem, the rear fan assembly, and the cleaned up rear exhaust cover, which is looking fantastic. And not to forget the plastic piece that goes in front of the heat sinks, which really completes the look. All I have left to do now is reinstall the RAM, the GPU, the fan assembly with the handle. And I know I haven't talked about the hard drives that we'll be using, but it's going to be a very cool addition to the Power Mac, and you'll see why very shortly. Most of the older G5 models, such as this Power Mac, use normal DDR RAM. Now, the later G5 versions actually have DDR2 RAM, and they can go up to a maximum of 16 gigabytes, but this one, and similar versions like it, can only go up to 8 gigabytes. Back when these systems were new, RAM was expensive, but you were getting your money's worth out of it because it also significantly changed how the computer actually ran. It not only helps out in making the system feel faster, but it also helps out with multitasking and also with really intensive applications. Nowadays, RAM itself is not as awesome as it used to be because the processors themselves are also really fast, and obviously we also have SSDs, NVMe drives, a lot more solid state stuff, but back in the day, RAM really made a big difference. Now, I know I'm not taking full advantage of the G5 here with only 2 RAM sticks, but this is all that I have in terms of RAM that actually works with the system. What I have here are two 256 megabyte sticks, obviously DDR, and they are clocked in at 400 megahertz. So even though it's not taking full advantage of the system as a whole, this is actually the stock factory configuration based on the sticker that's at the bottom here. So at the very least, in terms of it being clean, we are also bringing it back to its factory condition with the RAM. You actually have to pay attention to where you're installing the RAM inside a G5 because, well, if you don't do it properly, it's going to complain. The only reason I have two matching sticks is because I can install them in matching pairs because the G5 itself likes to have matching pairs. And they do need to be installed starting from the closest ones, just like that. And then I can put the other pair on the top here. So the RAM is installed with one being in the top, the other being in the bottom, and when you install more RAM in a G5, you just have to put it out one at a time, and obviously the more RAM you go, the farther out it'll be. Just like the RAM back in the day, the GPU also made a big impact in how your system actually worked. Now, based on the information sticker, this is the lowest end that they actually offered at the time. It's the NVIDIA GeForce FX 5200 Ultra with 64 megabytes of VRAM. So even though it's nothing too fancy, it is at least the stock Apple card, and as you can see, it's looking fantastic. And it does match the Power Mac because we do have the matching design language on the back here, and of course ADC. We can also double check the information of the GPU whenever we actually get macOS up and running on this, but this is nothing super fancy in terms of graphics cards, but I'm just happy that it has ADC in the first place. Now, the interesting part that separates this card from other cards is the fact that because it has ADC, it also has these extra pins to supply extra power. And this is just as easy to install like the RAM. All you have to do is line it up and it'll click into place. And just like that, the GPU is installed. Well, for the most part, we still have to install the screw that actually holds it. But with that, we're basically done. We just need to put the fan in, the acrylic piece, the door, and obviously the hard drive itself. The GPU is fully reinstalled. And to complete the active cooling side of things, the last two fans. So what exactly is so cool and awesome about this hard drive that I keep on talking about? Well, we are installing this. And what's so awesome about it? That's right. The thumbnail was not lying. We are installing 3 terabytes inside a Power Mac G5. I've also already installed the special hard drive mounting screws for the custom caddy because, well, how else are you going to put a hard drive in the system? I was lucky enough to get the extra set that typically go here. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a spare set, so at least for now, I don't have a proper way of installing a second hard drive. But I think that 3 terabytes is going to be more than enough, at least for now. When I first saw this, I was trying to figure out how does this actually work. But then I realized it's surprisingly simple. We do have 2 hard drive bays here, A and B, and the drive letters are on these cool locking tabs to make sure that your hard drive is not going anywhere, especially if you're moving the system around. So it's a nice little feature to actually have on this system. And the funny part about this is that there is so much space inside the G5 enclosure, but there's only room for 2 full-size hard drives. The only reason it's like this is because the airflow came first and Apple wanted to optimize the G5 cooling system as much as possible. So this was the only realistic solution because, well, airflow came first. We also have not 1, not 2, but 2.5 tracks on this setup here. The bottom bay is the easiest one to work with because it just uses this 1 track. But the second one actually has this weird setup where it first starts off normally, but then it goes up because, well, there's not a lot of space here to install it normally, so you have to try to move it up and then switch over to the half track for the last 2 screws that are closer to the front of the system, so that way it can actually accommodate 2 full-size hard drives without it being slanted or at an angle or anything weird like that. It looks normal once it's actually in place, but it is weird to install, but it's an interesting kind of weird. We definitely don't see something like this nowadays, but it's a very cool part of the G5. I will be installing the main system drive in the top bay because it's just more convenient. It's out of the way, and it also means that if I want to test out another hard drive, then I have the bottom bay, which is easier to work with, available. You certainly don't install hard drives like this all the time. You do have to make sure that the SATA connectors are out of the way, but as you can see, it goes up and then it lines in with the half track. It clicks into place and you just need to hook it up to the Power Mac. So with data and power connected, our hard drive installation is complete. I really do like the different features of this case design, and this is one aspect that I really like because despite the weird installation method, the end result is really clean looking. With the system being as clean as I can possibly make it, alongside the addition of the new hard drive, we can finally close it up. First goes the acrylic piece itself for that awesome airflow. It's obviously not as easy as the acrylic. We can still go ahead and line it up, lock it up, and just like that, we have a restored Power Mac. Obviously, the setup itself is still a work in progress, but at the very least, the cinema display and now the Power Mac are both fully cleaned up. The keyboard situation is another story, but again, it's still temporary. It's only because that keyboard actually works despite it not being cleaned up, and even though that one is clean, it's not fully functional. So I just have that one there because it looks nice, and it's this one to actually make it past the Mac OS Leopard setup. There is actually one thing we can do in terms of organization before we actually start using the setup. Now, cable organizing here is going to be a whole other topic and probably a different video, but at the very least we can remove this FireWire cable here because obviously the system didn't have a hard drive before. And I had to use this Seagate hard drive, which also has Mac OS installed on it. However, because we actually installed that Seagate drive, we don't need to use this Seagate drive anymore, and I can finally remove the cable from this mess here, because that also has my iTunes library. Yes, it's a very messy hard drive, but it does get the job done. However, because of the upgrades we've made to the Power Mac, I'm hoping to potentially clear up some space on that and use it solely as an iTunes drive. Well, would you look at that? It's already organized because there's one less cable. Yeah, it's still not perfect, but one less cable means one less cable. So this will be plugged into the black book here because, like I said, it's my iTunes library, and this is what I use iTunes on. It made this area a bit more messy now, but at least it's not on the floor. Here goes nothing. And I'm going to hold down eject. So of course we have the flashing question mark icon because we don't have an operating system. But we will be installing Mac OS Leopard. So this is my retail copy of Leopard. I don't have any of the packaging or anything extra, it's just the DVD. But this specific copy is actually 10.5.1, so it's pretty much as close to retail as possible in terms of, no updates. We even have a copyright date of 2007. I got this DVD alongside my PowerBook G4, and now it's not only being used in a PowerBook, but also a Power Mac. So there is the DVD, and now we just have to wait for it to show up. So far so good, we have an Apple logo. It'll take a while because it is of course a DVD, and I know I could go with a FireWire drive or USB or anything like that, but considering I have the DVD and we have an optical drive, I might as well use it. Now this is exciting. For the very first time, I can actually install an operating system on the Power Mac. So obviously we will go ahead and prepare the install. It looks fantastic on this display. And what version of the installer is this? 1.0.1, copyright 2006 and 2007. So obviously we will need to use disk utility. And there it is, our 3 terabyte drive has been detected by Disk Utility. And if you're wondering why I installed 3 terabytes in a G5 from 2004, it's actually for a couple of reasons. First off, I want to install as many operating systems as I possibly can on the G5 itself. Now, even though this is a 2004 version of the G5, and that means I can't install 10.2 Jaguar, I can at least install 10.3, 10.4, and obviously 10.5 Leopard here. And at the same time, I can also install the server counterparts. So that brings us up to 6 operating systems already on one system. At the same time, I can also install custom editions such as Sorbet Leopard and Shuriken, which is the Tiger version of Sorbet Leopard. And even if I set all the partitions to 250 gigabytes, which is definitely more than enough space for all of those operating systems, it still leaves me with 1 terabyte available for general storage. Now, I could also use that for other operating systems as well, but I plan on just using Mac OS, at least for now, and I want to use the remaining 1 terabyte partition for all the old Mac OS programs and games that can actually run on, you guessed it, old Mac OS. So it'll not only be excellent as a multi-system environment for all the different versions of Mac OS, but I'll also have a dedicated spot just for old Mac games and utilities. Now technically it does only show up as 2.7 terabytes, but is that really an issue? I mean, we have all this space available, and like I said, 250 gigabytes on each partition for Mac OS. So I don't really think that's going to be a problem. But what we have to do now is obviously partition the drive so that way it'll at least be set up for the future. And it's going to take a while to do. I'll do all of this off camera and show you the end result. So there it is, 9 partitions on one drive. We obviously have the 3 main systems here, Panther, Tiger, Leopard, and obviously the server counterparts alongside Shuriken and Sorbet Leopard. And we also have the Macintosh storage drive, which is just under 800 gigabytes. So I think we have a good amount of storage to work with here, considering every single one of these is 250 gig. Of course, these are macOS Extended journaled, and because this is a PowerPC Mac, it is Apple Partition Map instead of the Intel-based one. Yeah, it's pretty funny to see this here. Partition. Now this is insane. I thought the PowerBook was fancy with Leopard and Tiger installed on just one drive, but no. 8 operating systems inside one Power Mac alongside an extra 800 gigabytes of available storage here. So obviously we still need to install something on all of these partitions. At the very least, we will get Leopard up and running because, well, that's what we're using, but we will definitely have an installation special because, well, it's not every day you install pretty much every single operating system on one Power Mac. Now, we're basically done with Disk Utility now, so we can go ahead and close out of it and continue on with the Leopard installer itself. So let's go ahead and click Continue. Wait for the DVD to spin up again. Obviously, we read this entire thing multiple times, so we'll go ahead and agree. And this is such a difficult question. Where do we want to install Mac OS? Wow, what do you know? 10.5 Leopard. Let's go ahead and choose that. Oh, only 11.4 gigabytes? I think we got plenty of space here. In fact, if we actually go to Options here, Install Mac OS, Archive, Erase, and Install. Yeah, let's just do Install Mac OS here. And then we do want to customize this because why not? We have so many fantastic options to choose from. Essential System Software? Yes, please. It's so awesome that you can't even deselect it. Printer drivers? Oh, you bet we're going to install all 3.4 gigabytes of this. Why? Well, why not? We still have 237 gigabytes even with all of this selected. And actually, I just remembered while sitting here at the installer page that This Leopard DVD used to give me some problems with my PowerBook G4. Now, it used to be completely fine, but the last time I tried to reinstall Leopard with a fresh installation, not an upgrade, but a fresh install, it kept giving me a installation failed message, and I think it was something to do with the dictionary or the language or something about that. Now, I was never able to figure out if it was a G4 problem or a DVD problem, but now we actually have another PowerPC Mac to test it out on. So hopefully we don't have the same issue, but in order to prevent that from happening again, I have deselected additional fonts and language translations, but I will keep the printer drivers and X11. And there it is, we're installing. So obviously it is a DVD, and I will actually leave it to check the DVD. It's finally installing! The DVD drive is doing DVD things. And as for the time remaining, we have about an hour and 6 minutes. Now, immediately it was at an hour and 21 minutes, but then it quickly went down to this. And it's actually actively going down as we speak. So it'll probably take around, if it was really fast, maybe 40 minutes. It hasn't even been 20 minutes yet, and we're already down to about 5 minutes remaining, which is really fast, and it's probably because this is on a SATA drive instead of IDE like on the PowerBook, which I'm used to. Classic macOS welcome videos. It's always awesome to see them once again, and I've seen the one for Leopard a couple of times, but it's always fun to see it again. I have also seen the ones for Tiger and Panther, but I've really only seen them once or twice. I have seen the one for Leopard a lot more, and I can't wait to see those in action as well. Oh yeah, and it worked. It was actually successful. I'm really happy to know that my DVD is still functional, and I still don't know what was going on in terms of the PowerBook and why it failed in the first place, but regardless, it actually worked. We have macOS Leopard on this, so let's go ahead and set it up. Both of the keyboards are in the exact same layout, so we will just go ahead and continue. And do you already own a Mac? Why, yes, I own several Macs, but I don't want a Time Machine backup or really any sort of backup. I want this to be a fresh install, so we'll go ahead and click on Do Not Transfer My Information. Enter your Apple ID. I mean, if it was 2007, sure, but in this case, I'm going to do Command Q and skip that. And then now comes time for the user account. Typically, whenever I create a user account for an old Mac system like this, I will usually just name it after the type of Mac model that it is. So in this case, Power Mac G5, and in the past, I've done Mac Mini, MacBook, PowerBook G4. However, I think starting with this, I'm going to make a small change to this. Now, the name itself I will leave as Power Mac G5, but that's also because I can put a space in between everything. The short name itself doesn't allow for any spaces in between the letters, so I will actually remove the Power Mac portion and just leave it with G5. I think that this is a good compromise because it'll keep the short name nice and neat while keeping the full name as the user account name. So obviously Power Mac G5 because it's a G5, but only G5 for the home folder. And going on into the future, I probably will do this with other similar PowerPC systems such as a G4 or even a G3. But in terms of the Intel Macs, I will probably just keep them as MacBook, Mac Mini, you know, just general naming like that. And of course, we have not entered a password. For now, I'm just going to skip it. And take a look at that. The date and time actually still works. Because I connected to Ethernet, it is currently pulling this information from the Apple servers. So because of that, we don't even have to set this up. And of course, don't forget to register. Enjoy your Apple computer. And then we have the classic blue screen here from early macOS. And finally, after all this time, we have macOS up and running with the wonderful Aurora wallpaper. And of course, even though Leopard was the first version to move away from the Aqua theme, it still looks fantastic on the cinema display here. Now, I absolutely love this. It's insane to see this on the G5. And I know that other Macs can run more versions of macOS, especially the early Intel ones. You can get Tiger all the way up to basically modern macOS using Open Core Legacy Patcher. But in this case, because it's a PowerPC system and it's a G5, we are just limited to basically these three versions of macOS. But regardless, it's so cool to see this on the G5. And this is a cinema display. It almost reaches the bottom of the display itself. So it's crazy to see this. It's a very cool addition. And of course, we do still need to make these fully operational, but we're just getting started. And of course, we can't forget that even with all of this, we still have roughly 800 gigabytes of pure storage. Now, before we wrap up with the install DVD, I do want to take a look at the optional installs as well, because we have so much space, we might as well install some extras. Every time that I've installed macOS Leopard from this DVD, I've never really looked at the optional installs available. Now, it looks basically the same as the customized menu we saw prior to installation. However, we also have iPod support and applications. Now, iPod support would have been fantastic for 2007, but nowadays, if we want to get the most out of iPhone, iPod, and even iPad compatibility, all we have to do is update iTunes. Applications, on the other hand, has, you guessed it, applications. What a surprise. Now, we obviously have everything installed here, such as Address Book, iChat, iCal, Safari, and even though it doesn't seem like something you would use all the time, it is nice to have it regardless. So that pretty much wraps up the optional install area here. But after that, we can move on to Xcode. I've never installed Xcode, I've never used Xcode, I don't even know what these applications look like, but regardless, considering we have a G5 and a factory copy of Leopard, I'm still going to go ahead and install them. Now, I have no idea if I'll even be able to make use of these applications, but at the very least, it would be cool to check out, especially on a G5. And in fact, there is actually extra tools here we can install, which we might as well. So I have selected everything because why not? I will do this one at a time because I don't want anything to be messed up, but we're installing Xcode. It's installing 10.4 Universal, that's cool. Nice! Next up, Dashcode. So let's close out of this and start this. And of course, we gotta customize it. It is just Dashcode itself. All that's left to do now is to close out of this and continue on with WebObjects. Just like the other two installers, it'll be pretty much identical. And of course, after we agree, it'll take 333 megabytes. Obviously, we want everything here, so we will leave it as is. Nice! With everything Xcode now installed on the G5, I think I'll also take this PDF file and copy it over to the system itself. And to make it even more fancy, I'll put it in the Documents tab. So we will copy this, place this here, and just like that, we have extra information about Xcode right on the G5 itself. That also means we can finally actually take the DVD out of the system, because with that, we are done. The Leopard installer has done it again. It brought our Power Mac back to life. Believe it or not, the old software update utility still works. It sounds crazy, but it is awesome, and not to mention convenient, because all I have to do is click on install and the G5 will be fully up to date. Now, of course, we have the last update to Leopard, version 10.5.8, and we also have the last version of iTunes that is supported on Leopard, 10.6.3. After we update macOS itself, we should also have some Java and security updates. Now, I remember that Tiger definitely has a lot of updates, but for Leopard, I'm not too sure. I guess we will find out though once we click on install. Before we update iTunes though, I do want to check real quick to see which version of iTunes this copy actually shipped out with. Now, I'm pretty sure that's the iTunes 7 logo. I know that they changed it for iTunes 8, or they definitely did for iTunes 9 and 10. And because this is from 2007, I don't think it would be iTunes 6 or 5. So 7 seems to line up with the time period here. And it is iTunes 7. Specifically 7.5. So it is a later release of iTunes 7, And even though it would be cool to keep this on Leopard, I do want to update everything to the fullest that everything is supported. And it's not like we're missing out on much because 10.3 Panther and 10.4 Tiger have older versions of iTunes that are officially supported. I'm pretty sure that Tiger supports only up to iTunes 8 or iTunes 9. And as for Panther, I have no idea because I haven't really used Panther. But that's the whole point of why we set this G5 as it is. Older iTunes would just look better on the Aqua interface anyways. Before we install anything else on the G5, I will go ahead and run software update because if we take a look at About This Mac, we are of course still on 10.5.1, like the DVD itself says. It's obviously not really a security concern because, well, this is an operating system from 2007 running on a Mac that is 2 generations behind in terms of the architecture itself. So yeah, I'm not really worried about that. It's mainly just to get the extra improvements and stability updates that they made for Leopard later on in its life cycle. So let's go ahead and click on install and just wait for it to update. Now that is awesome. We're back at the desktop and we already have the new iTunes logo here, but we also have 10.5.8, so we are fully up to date in terms of the actual Mac OS release, but I'm sure we still have plenty of updates here in software update. We should have a security update, Java, and I don't actually know what else we have, but there's definitely going to be some updates here. Remote desktop, airport utility, Java, Safari, iLife. Now I do actually have iLife 05 on a DVD, and we could install that in the future, but for now, I don't have any sort of iLife suite installed. There's also a front row update, which is interesting, migration assistant, and a security update from 2011. So for Safari, we are going to Safari 5, and if we take a look at Safari, this is actually Safari version 4.0.2. And take a look at settings here. We are at version 2. I almost didn't see this, but this is hilarious. PowerMac G5's PowerMac G5. So let's go ahead and run this next set of updates here, and I'm sure there's still going to be some left to do, but at the very least, we are getting through this. Nice. Looks like we do have another Java update here, and if we take a look at Safari, we have updated it to 5.0.6. Like that's really going to make a difference. It's still ancient Safari, but I guess it is updated. And if we also take a look at front row, this itself should also be updated. Yeah, 2.1.7. The update for airport utility was successful, and as you can see, it'll be helpful for all the airports that I have connected here. The PowerMac itself is actually connected to the internet with an airport. Now we wait for the Java update to finish up, and hopefully we should be almost done. Nice. With that, we are pretty much done with software update for now. We can actually use this again in the future because with software that's actually on a DVD, there's bound to be updates. And if I install something like iWork, iLife, or even Final Cut Studio from a DVD itself, I can use this to update the software. There is still some stuff we can actually update beyond software update itself, and that is regarding iTunes. Despite the fact we actually updated iTunes, I can't use it. The reason why is because QuickTime itself requires version 7.5.5 or later, and if we actually open up QuickTime, we are still running 7.3.0, copyright 2007. Now, it is a bit strange that software update itself doesn't have QuickTime, but at the same time, it kind of makes sense because during this era, QuickTime was more of an Apple website thing because they also had pro versions of it. There actually is an easy way to get around this, and I don't even have to update Safari beyond what we actually did. Ancient web browsers like Safari 5 are still usable because of awesome websites like MacintoshGarden.org. Now, this is obviously a Macintosh-oriented web page, but because of the way it's styled, I can still use it with Safari 5, and it makes it really easy to actually install and update software on this. There's a lot of cool software and games on this website, and the G5 is a perfect system to use with this website. So here we have what we need, QuickTime 7 for Leopard and Snow Leopard, and I will be downloading the latest release that is available, in this case version 7.7.0, and 7.5.5 also says that it was a compatibility update, and well, I mean, based on this, we can't even use it without that version. And of course with Safari comes the classic download page here, so let's upgrade QuickTime. The only real system requirement is macOS Leopard itself. We will actually have iTunes functional after this. We are now fully updated in terms of QuickTime, and will iTunes actually open? It works! So we actually have a functional install of iTunes here, and we have the classic iTunes 10 design here. Just to double check, it is indeed 10.6.3, so we are up to date in terms of iTunes, QuickTime, and macOS in general. With that, the G5 is now fully operational. There is still a lot of work to be done in terms of the setup and the partition side of things, but at the very least, I can actually use the G5 without being connected up to an external hard drive every single time I want to power it up. After all our hard work, here it is. The G5 has been cleaned up. It actually has a hard drive, and I can actually use the G5 while also using iTunes at the same time. How crazy is that? But honestly, I'm really happy with how everything turned out. Even though the setup itself is still a work in progress, it's actually usable. And before, I really didn't want to install any programs or games because it would just clog up that hard drive. But now I can do that and more. I can't wait to also install all of these versions of macOS as well. And you bet I'm going to take advantage of that storage drive for all the programs we're going to be installing. It'll be nice to actually have a backup of the installers as well, so everything is a win-win here, and I just can't wait to actually use the setup more. I will install some essential software and some great games off Macintosh Garden, but at the same time, I won't be filming absolutely everything because, well, filming every single install is going to get real boring real fast. We already saw it with macOS, Xcode, and even QuickTime, but those were important system upgrades because, well, we didn't even have a hard drive to begin with. The setup itself may seem outdated compared to modern equipment, but I am really looking forward to software that actually works, software that has no subscription model, and software that doesn't need a connection to the internet. That is something that is really going to be awesome to see. And the best part about this is that it's a PowerPC Mac. And as a PowerPC Mac, it means that there is a lot of software available for this that was never ported over to Intel. So that means I can actually use PowerPC only applications because it's a PowerPC Mac. There is so much more potential with the G5, the cinema display, and now old macOS. If you enjoyed seeing this setup in action and you want to see it continue to evolve alongside everything else here, then consider subscribing. It not only helps out the channel, but it also helps me bring out more videos to you guys about awesome stuff like this. And if you enjoyed it, then consider leaving a thumbs up. But that's pretty much it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.